We've been talking recently about some of the troubling trends for men and boys in the workforce and higher education and in other key areas of life. But there's a deeper question here. What anchors young men and shapes their moral and character formation?
I would say it's time for men generally to step up. It's time for dads to model proper, positive, masculine behavior.
On this episode, we explore why formative institutions in the realms of education, faith communities, families, community associations, and strong mentoring relationships might be the missing anchors that help young men thrive and find purpose. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. This year, Sutherland Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary, thanks to all those who support the work we do for Utah and our great nation. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn with Beth Akers. We're going to dive into our conversation today with Sam Abrams. He's a scholar for the American Enterprise Institute. He's also professor at Sarah Lawrence College and a Sutherland Institute visiting scholar. Joining us in the virtual studio, Sam, thanks for being with us on Defending Ideas.
My pleasure, and greetings from New York City.
Sam, we're excited to talk to you about this issue today because this question has been weighing on my mind a lot. Beth and I have talked about it as we've kind of been diving into this issue of men and boys and how we can arrange public policy and aspects of our society to be more conducive to thriving and flourishing for men and boys. And the big question I think will be fun to talk about with you today is this question of what anchors young men? What are the kinds of things that they need to have access to formative institutions for character formation, moral formation, in ways that are constructive, and how are they not getting that today, and what can we do about it? So maybe to dive in, especially given your role in the world of higher education, I want to start with this kind of broad question of just what are you observing? What do you see with college-age men? What are they dealing with? What do they not have access to that they need? Help us just get a lay of the land of the experience of young men today from your vantage point.
Sure. And when I say this, I don't want to be fatalistic. I don't want it to sound like it's a final pronouncement. And whenever I speak about this, I inevitably get a lot of hate mail from folks and say I've overgeneralized. And I want to be clear that I'm making observations. I visit scores and scores of colleges and universities around the country every year. And I meet with thousands of students, and I love doing it. But, anytime I make some claim about something or another, people say, hey, you're misunderstanding this. And I do understand that, but, these are my observations, and I'm happy to share them. And what I'm seeing on our college and university campuses today when it comes to men is that even in the schools in the South, where you have a large culture of fraternal life, and you see these guys walking around without shirts, going to various football games and so on. The average college male today comes to college fundamentally broken. And that's a horrible thing for me to say. And when I say broken, what I mean is they come in as first years, unsure of who they are. They are not tethered in meaningful networks and meaningful relationships. They're curious to meet others. They don't know how to make friendships necessarily with fellow men. They certainly don't know how to make friendships with women. I am becoming a dating resource, which I very much am uncomfortable with many men who ask me, how do you approach a young lady? And I regularly say, this is just not something I can help you with. But the questions are thrown my way all the time. And I'm seeing men who simply feel lost, untethered, unanchored. There's something in them, in many cases, they want to contribute. But more often than not, they don't know their place in the world. They don't know how to act. They don't know how to behave. And I think most troubling on many of our college and university campuses, they feel like they're under attack. Over the last decade or so, we have talked, in the public sphere quite a bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion and these sorts of programs. And one of the hallmarks of these programs, and I'm sure going to get a lot of hate mail for saying this, is that fairly frequently we see men portrayed as predatory. We see men portrayed as misogynistic. We see men portrayed as dangerous and threatening. And when so many of these men set foot on campus are at pre-orientation or orientation programs and come in lost, come in lacking social connection, lacking a purpose in many cases, and then are told they're dangerous. For better or for worse, this does not serve the men very well. This does not serve our communities very well. This does not serve our campuses very well. So this is a fairly negative picture. I'm sorry to say it, but I also believe that we have to talk about this openly, and it's the only way we're going to move forward and probably solve it, which is to say men are struggling. They're missing some things. They're being told they're not great. And my point is we need to think about saying, let's stop using this language. Let's stop saying they're not great. And let's try to help them get a little better.
Sam, what has changed about college campus culture in recent years to cause this, or what about the male student experience has changed in recent decades on campus?
So this is a question we could spend hours on. So I'll try to be very brief on it. Number one, again, goes back to what I had just talked about, which is these orientation programs where you have staffers basically saying, look, again, men are evil, men are dangerous, so on and so forth. And they're telling the students this. And there are tip lines and biased reporting lines on the back of student IDs. If you feel threatened, if you feel uncomfortable, if something made you a little off, call this line. And next thing you know, an administrator of some sort is in your dorm room talking about it. When you walk through many dorms, when you walk through campuses, there is messaging that is unendingly negative toward our young men. And there's a fixation, a hyperfixation on questions of assault and what is okay to touch, not touch, and so on. So I think that's a very big problem. We have gender imbalances on our college and university campuses where men are very, very much so now the minority, sometimes as low as 30-40% of college and university campuses. You have a faculty that is trending toward more and more women. You have fewer male role models on our college and university campuses. Those are some of the things that our first-year students and then our men are dealing with on our higher ed campuses. But on top of that, our men or young men are coming in as first years as freshmen, not anchored to begin with. So you have a problem coming in from earlier, from K-12 life, where they may not have the networks and the role models and the sort of fortitude and anchoring that a lot of these men need. They get there and then they're bombarded with these ideas, these messages, and the idea that if you do something wrong, you may have an administrator coming to you. This creates a huge problem.
I wonder how much of this is a higher ed problem versus just a broader culture problem. When I think back to, it first occurred to me as a new boy mom several years ago now that the term toxic masculinity might be creating a systemic problem for boys, that, this sense of that your identity is inherently wrong in a way became really a part of the popular lexicon. Has that dribbled down to college campuses, or are college campuses creating a broader problem in their own unique ways?
So I think you're exactly right. The toxic masculinity issue and the issue of boys being problematic starts well before they get to college or university campuses. We see this as early as preschools. We see this as early as kindergartens and elementary schools, where boys and girls are different. They develop differently. They need different things. There are videos left and right online that you can watch regularly, right? Where you can see how young boys and young girls who are roughly the same age chronologically, not developmentally, but chronologically behave differently and associate differently. There are incredible videos of showing, two girls playing nicely, and then you'll see two boys where one is throwing the other boy into a trash can and they're giggling. Boys and girls develop differently. This is just a truth. And this is a truth I don't have a problem with. And as a dad myself of a young guy, I love watching that and I love seeing that. So no, the concept of not dealing with boys younger is certainly a problem, and it's absolutely trickled all the way up to college and university campuses. The problem now is that when these men or young men get to campus, we're not correcting it. We're not giving them the support. So they go out, they don't necessarily get married, although that's beginning to shift. And they don't have the role models and the ideas of, okay, now I'm the adult. Are we going to say no to this? And how are we going to behave toward it?
Sam, I want to ask you about, we need to take a quick break in a minute, but I want to ask you about sort of how we can maybe start thinking about changing campus culture, and as Beth mentioned, even kind of broader aspects of culture, to have more of these kind of pro-social, healthy character and moral formation roles, I guess, for young men. And maybe to kind of tease that, let's get into more detail in the next segment. But before we go to break, if you can kind of start thinking about or start articulating for our audience, if you could do anything you wanted, what would you change about college campus culture or policy or administration to make college a more welcoming, positive, formative institution for young men?
That is a huge question. I would say it's time for men generally to step up. It's time for dads to model proper, positive, masculine behavior. And that means demonstrate a moral code. That means showcase that life is far more important than just your bank account. It's about civic virtue. It's about republicanism. It's about being part of one's community writ large. We are not doing that. We do not see enough of that. And I've taken it very seriously and unintentionally as a male professor in my college at Sarah Lawrence to try to represent this. There are so many young men who come to me regularly who want to talk and need guidance. Do I want to be a parent to 50 other men? Obviously not. But do I need to try to show them and showcase, look, you can be more. These are the things we can do. Absolutely. So one of the first things we could do is very, very gently say to the men on university campuses, model this, showcase this. And is it a great public policy solution that needs to be written down in, from Congress to the White House? No, it's something we can do immediately, quickly, and I believe very powerfully.
Well, let's get into some more detail on that in just a minute, because I want to ask you about this idea of brotherhood and kind of expand on that concept of men modeling this on college campuses and faith organizations and other community organizations. So let's dive into that in just a minute. We're going to take a really quick break. This is Defending Ideas, talking with Sam Abrams and, of course, Beth Akers. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn, joined again by Beth Akers, AEI Senior Fellow and contributor here at Defending Ideas. We've been talking with Sam Abrams of AEI and Sarah Lawrence College. He's also a Sutherland visiting scholar, about the issue of boys and men and what anchors young men and what kind of formative institutional reforms can we deploy to make that more possible for young men. Before we continue, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you like to get your shows. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. If you watch on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the Sutherland Institute YouTube channel and click the little bell icon on the corner so you get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. All that and more at defendingideas.org. or wherever you get your shows. So Sam and Beth, let's continue, because Sam, you mentioned something before the break about this idea of, I think I wrote it down as dads modeling proper masculinity, and sort of this idea of, well, let's sort of restore this culture of how to do that. And I want to ask you, how do we do that? Kind of this idea of restoring a sense of brotherhood and a sense of, well, this is what it means to be a healthy, good man today. What do you see as the role of that idea of positive masculine brotherhood, either on college campuses or in other spheres?
So we need to talk about it in both sets of spheres. And there is quite a bit of research that shows that young boys aged 6 to 7 through about 12, that is when a lot of these ideas about who they are in terms of their gender and their role tend to solidify. So we can start doing this and modeling this as early as that. And there's no reason not to. And I'll tell you a story that I've been thinking about that never really hit until recently, which was I was a member of a synagogue. It wasn't a deeply religious synagogue, but it was very deeply community focused. And before a number of holidays, the men's club would put together various food packages, care packages. And it was important that my brother and I went with these men and sort of scattered throughout the Philadelphia region, which is where I'm from. And we would develop this. Looking back at those moments, those men who were in those men's clubs are younger than I am today. These were men in their 30s. I did not realize that. I did not appreciate that 20 some odd years ago when this was happening. What I realized today is that those men were giving back. Those men were modeling everything. And I am so grateful for that, because had those sorts of things not happened, I would not be who I am today. And I'm very grateful again for that. We can model this in elementary school and middle school. We can also model this on college and university campuses. One of the things I've been writing about and thinking about is, how do we do this nowadays on college and university campuses? I don't want to create more bureaucracy immediately at all. I think that's a mistake. I don't want to fold this into the approach that the DEI offices have taken for years. I don't want to create a men's center the way we have women's centers. The idea is instead, what resources do we have that we could bring to our university campuses? And there are many. When I was in college at Stanford, I had many friends who were members of the LDS church, and at least 2 nights a week, they would disappear. And they would go to church functions. And I would often ask, what do you guys do? What are you doing there? And they wouldn't give me all the details. They said they couldn't, not a problem. But I share it because I said, so why do you go? And they never went out of a sense of obligation or some form of religious determinism. They went because it was meaningful, special, and they said they would have a great time. It was social. And this is where those values were propagated and perpetuated. We already have institutions like the Church of Latter-day Saints, like Jewish organizations, like Catholic organizations, like Muslim organizations. These things already exist. We should be welcoming them on campus, not for any form of radicalization, of course, but to say, we have community organizations here. Let's connect. Let's model the behavior with these pre-existing institutions. I have hopefully a piece coming out about Masons. I was in the Masons for quite a few years, and there was a Masonic chapter established at Harvard where I was as a graduate student. It grew to about 500 students. And within a period of months, I wasn't alone. There were people scattered throughout the Boston and Cambridge area of all walks of life: finance, medicine, mechanics. They knew everything. They had connections everywhere, from police officers to what have you. And you could connect to them. They would tell you their stories. And by spending time with them, they modeled their behavior for you. And you knew you weren't alone, and you would get a course correction. You would complain, you would explain something, and the guys would say, hey, wait a minute, are you sure you're thinking about that correctly? So on and so forth. So these organizations exist. They're plentiful. Let's use them, whether they're fraternal, whether they're religious, what have you. Let's invite them and let's connect with them, because the men on our campuses need them desperately.
Sam, something that feels challenging to me on this issue is, we come back to this idea of community and brotherhood, as being so critically important. And it feels like so many of us find that in religion, the institutions of religion. But it's hard to kind of go out with this public message and say, yes, you should go join a religion. It's just for people who are not already embracing those ideas, that's not a message that is very welcomed, And so I question the extent to which this solves the problem for people who are experiencing the challenge of being disconnected in the first place. Do you have any thoughts on that? How do you get over that hurdle?
Absolutely. So first, they don't necessarily need to be religious organizations. And I understand the stigma and the biases associated with that. I also believe, riffing off of Robert Putnam, who was one of my mentors in graduate school, that religion isn't a building. It isn't even a faith. It's a collection of people. And the fact is that if we can separate for a minute some of the religious practices and and certain community traditions from the idea that we're here to connect with you in some sort of way, that can be very, very powerful. There are large numbers of Jewish students on campus who identify simply as Jewish, but they don't identify as religious or practicing or engaging in any way. When we survey them, and we've been doing that for years, especially after the October 7th massacres, the students regularly say they're looking for something. It doesn't mean they're looking to practice in any traditional way. They're looking to connect in a meaningful way. So I hear you. I think you're absolutely right. But I also think the time is also right that if we have faith-based organizations that reach out now, there may be a very wide open window to still connect, not necessarily on religious practice and religious belief, but on certain cultural beliefs and value beliefs. And We are certainly seeing that. I'll give you an example. Chabad, which is a very religious group, not my group, has connected with so many Jewish students in the last 2 years because they were simply there. They extended a hand on campuses to students who needed it. And Chabad, I want to be very clear, does not proselytize and does not judge and does not try to force any form of religious practice down any of the Jewish students' throats. It's literally, we're here for you. And that message has resonated like nobody's business over the last couple of years. So this is not saying we need to introduce religion explicitly. I don't have a problem with faith and religion that way, but I think it can be done effectively if we separate them just a little bit. Because again, what's very clear is our students are hurting and they're looking for something.
So it's almost like a shift to the celebration of community and connection and saying, these institutions, faith offer that, but there are other places you can find this as well. And students may find their way to faith institutions as a result.
Absolutely.
Sam and Beth, that comment reminds me of an event we did at Sutherland a couple years ago. We held a religious freedom, kind of the role of faith in public life event down at BYU campus. And I was moderating a panel, and I asked our religious, our constitutional law and religious freedom scholar, Bill Duncan, this question, because we were talking about this very thing, this idea of community and connection in the context of faith institutions. And I kind of joked with him and said, well, a brother of mine, loves CrossFit, and he's joked with me that CrossFit is his religion, and he goes religiously and loves it, has a great sense of community. And I asked Bill, I'm like, is that just as good as sort of a religious affiliation? And at some point, we might have to bring Bill on and maybe discuss or even debate a little bit, because he said, that there are a lot of great benefits associationally of other organizations, but he was pointing out that, if memory serves, there is some evidence in the research that there is something a little bit unique about organizations that do kind of have that theological faith component. And so I say that in the context that could there be a message, and Sam, I'd love to hear how you would articulate this, but could there be a message that faith institutions, here are all the various things they provide to young people. One of those is, of course, for the theological faith-based institutions, that sort of connection to the divine. Other benefits can be connection to each other, connection to society. So is there a way to craft a message of, here's all that you can have access to, and then folks can sort of pursue what resonates with them, hoping they will be pulled into this broader constructive community? How would you articulate a message that weaves all that together as sort of a pitch, if you will, to young people?
So I wouldn't pitch to young people because I think they're going to be a little afraid of that. I think if they think it's too manicured and too massaged and so on, they're going to be a little scared, saying it's coming from some big corporate office and so on. I think it actually has to be localized and authentic. And that is, if there are a handful of folks who are already involved, they're going to be the ones who need to reach out and make those connections. What our students need today more than anything is a sense of authenticity and a sense of reality. They see so much through the digital world. They are bombarded with unending messages. And we know literally every other week a poll comes out showing how little trust in institutions they already have. So my concern is, I think you're raising a very good point. But at the same time, if we have something that looks like it's coming again from some central office, like if the American Jewish Committee here in New York says, let's have this pitch, you're going to have people run in the other way, the other direction. Whereas in many cases, this has to be a one at a time, very slow grassroots sort of movement, and say, look, hi, I'm Sam, I'm part of this. You want to come have a meal with me, or do you want to go do, we're doing this activity on Sunday, come with me, something like that. And it will build and build and build. That I think is probably the better way to do it. It's hard to plan, right? And it's not as attractive to say that, because it's not like I'm going to spend $10,000, we'll create a shiny campaign. But I think with our students today, and I'm just trying to be as honest as I can with 2 decades of being a college professor, I tend to think that stuff doesn't resonate as well as I would hope. And it's that authentic connection that often works, and it builds and builds and builds. If you have 8 or 10 kids getting together on a Friday for a Sabbath Shabbat dinner, and it goes well, everyone try to bring a friend the next time and build it up. I don't think they'll respond to an email or a coupon in the mail or a shiny poster. I think they'll just, what is this? But if it's my buddy says, hey, come with me and we had a good time, those benefits I think will accrue. So Unfortunately, I think it's a slow building slog rather than a snap my fingers and have a big simple policy solution. I think these communities have to be rebuilt with care. Our students are very shattered, especially the men. Baby steps literally to rebuild and to work. And before we run out of time, one of the things the boys' schools say here in New York that I have observed, even with my own son, is that they are fixated on the idea of relational learning and the idea that if you want to help a boy thrive, if you want to inspire a young boy, how do we make that boy dream big and be creative? They have to feel a connection to the teacher or someone in the school or some person that sort of inspires them. And when I first heard about this a couple of years ago, because there's a huge body of research, I went, oh my God, because I can tell you every person going back to kindergarten, and I'm still in my 40s, of who I wanted to show off to and have that because I had that relationship with them. I wanted to make them proud. So I think the same thing actually applies amazingly when you get to college, which is you do have to create those relationships. The students have to create them slowly and gradually. And I think the speed of which you can grow groups will, obviously accelerate when you have larger numbers. But I think it really requires that very narrow and personal relationship as a starting point. So that's where I'm thinking right now, and I'm trying to be practical about it. Just again, given how I've watched, groups form and fail, and initiatives form and fail for over 2 decades now on campuses around the country.
Sam, we need to take one more quick break, but I want to plant this idea in your mind to be thinking about, and when we come back, I want to ask you about this, because you talk a lot about authenticity and connection and relationships, which Beth, you and I need to talk more as we're engaging on this issue broadly, because it's making me think that it's not necessarily just, public policy solutions or, it's not going to be legislatures and governors' offices. They have an essential role to play. And there's a lot of stuff we've talked about that they can do. But I'm thinking there's something deeper going on it's about authentic relationships and connection and community and mentorship. So I just kind of flagged that. And Sam, what I want to ask you about when we come back from the break is some of your own personal experiences. Articulate for us how that sort of authentic connection and relationship can lead to some of this mentoring that men are missing, but they desperately need today. And then I want to close up by asking you about what advice you would give to men, to policymakers. So let's take a quick break and we'll dive into that. Once again, this is Defending Ideas with Sam Abrams and, of course, Beth Akers. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn with Beth Akers. We've been talking with Sam Abrams about formative institutions and what anchors young men, what men aren't getting today that they need to have the moral and character formation and guidance to become good men in society today across a variety of spheres. We want to jump into the last part of the conversation about sort of authentic experiences and connection and advice that Sam has for young men and dads and policymakers and college administrators. He's going to kind of fix everything for us in the last few minutes. Just kidding, Sam. But I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to Defending Ideas. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to listen to your shows. And also, if you prefer to watch on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Sutherland Institute YouTube channel and click the little bell icon in the corner so you get a notification each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, all of that wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. Sam, in the few minutes we have left, you mentioned something before the break about this idea of sort of this personal connection, these mentorship opportunities and authenticity. And I want to ask you about that. What have you seen experiences, either had experiences in your own life or seen examples of it in other folks' lives that sort of prove this point that can help policymakers and leaders sort of reorient towards a major part of the solution to what is ailing the men and boys who are struggling in today's society is restoring this idea of authentic connection and relationship, formative institutions, and mentoring. What experiences have you had that have made this point about mentorship and authenticity that maybe we're missing?
So the problem when we think about policymakers is this is not necessarily just a public policy solution. I wish I could draft a bill, fund it, and just say, let's make this happen. And again, with our college and university campus recruitment efforts to, if we brought religious institutions on campus, it's just not going to be that easy. In many respects, we have to shift our culture, which is so much harder, so much fuzzier, and so much more challenging. But, it's to say if you're a dad, you have to prioritize in a lot of respects being a dad. So one policy aspect of that is make sure that dads have paternity time. Make sure that dads have the chance to take off, if you will, for a little bit and be engaged as a father. It shouldn't just be moms; it should be dads too. We need to be able to normalize the idea that a parent, male or female, or dad can say, "Look, I need to go support my son at this event or at this game," and it shouldn't be looked upon negatively. So we can build in some of those protections legislatively, and that may be something very useful to do, and can be done, not necessarily as easily in private industry, but certainly through state level, local level, and federal level bureaucracies. So that could be a big start.
And that both mechanically makes it possible for this connection, but also I think sends a message culturally too, which moves the needle on the bigger front.
And that's the thing, men need to talk about what it's like to be a father, how great it is to be a father, and how meaningful it can be to be a father. I mean, we can all talk about, many dads can certainly talk about how amazing it is when they first hold their son or daughter, when he or she emerges. And, I'm very open about the fact that unexpectedly count to 2 after I got to hold my son after his birth, and my priorities changed faster than I ever imagined. I thought they might. I did not expect it to change within the course of 2 seconds of seeing him for the first time. And that hasn't changed. And I'm very comfortable with that moral code. If someone says, "Hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z," I'll say, "Sure, but I also have to take care of A, B, C because it relates to my family." And I will push back on that if I can do that. So those are some of the issues there. In terms of what we can do is as men to boys, and women can do this, certainly it's not meant to just be men and boys, but we can take time to actually listen and empathize when a young boy wants to talk. We need to actually provide an ear. We should not just assume you suck it up. It's not keep calm and carry on, to use the British idea. We want to hear what the young men are saying, and we want to take it as legitimate. We want to be there, and then we need to meet them on their own terms. We also, again, want to model behavior. I'll never forget when I was a Boy Scout, one of our assistant scoutmasters, who was a total mensch, good guy. I was struggling a little bit with some math sometime in middle school. And as a math teacher, he sat down after our meeting and spent hours with me doing that. And 2 things, in retrospect about that are worth commenting. First, my God, I don't believe he took that kind of time in the evening after he'd worked a long day, done scouting with a bunch of, wild young boys for a little bit, but then spent that additional time with me on his own time when I'm sure he was exhausted. So, Bo, if you're listening, thank you. 25 years later, thank you. So, that was such a powerful message. But the other side of it was that I didn't want to let him down, and there was no way I was going to let him down. And I didn't. And thanks to that additional bump and that additional help, I ended up doing great. No problem getting an A plus, whatever it is. Learned it, still know it. It's those little acts. It doesn't have to be a monumental act of courage, but the little acts, just like we talk about from the DEI offices, that microaggressions can, knock someone down. Well, micropositives, and I don't have an attractive word yet, but micro supports. There we go. Micro supports can build up people like you wouldn't believe. And I tried to do this as a dad. I tried to do this as a parent when I see other young men around. I certainly tried to do this as a professor. So, if we can tell stories about this, normalize this, showcase this, I think we can do incredible good. And the fact that we're even talking about this, to me, is thrilling, because what a treat that I'm actually able to articulate this to your listeners, the Sutherland community, and hopefully people beyond Utah as well, because this is a conversation we need to be having. So this is a great start. Thank you for having it.
Sam, I just love the idea of micro supports. You got to come up with the official brand so we can start marketing
I'm
that
writing
way.
it down, and you should write a paper.
Because I mean, I think that is just human nature, feeling seen or acknowledged. Even the tiniest bit of connection can be just transformative for people. And I think that is empowering to think of, the ability to create change through things that are within your capacity when maybe you don't have the time to sit after, Boy Scouts and tutor or whatever it is. The micro efforts, the micro supports are actually hugely impactful.
And this may be a little unethical sometimes. We have our phones, right? And we're not really supposed to check in with our students, but I know that if a student is struggling, they have my cell phone number, they've called me, I will text them, and it's all recorded, so nothing creepy or anything like that, but I will call them or text them if I know they're struggling and having a tough day or a tough weekend, and say, just checking in, are you okay? Let me know if you need to talk or you need anything. Those little things can help reorient students like nobody's business. I have one student, I don't want to share too many details so people can figure out, but I'll just say that I met this young man 11 years ago. He was struggling like nobody's business, totally lost. Number of years later, ended up going to a joint graduate program. All I can say is, because again, I don't want to overshare it, he is now a practicing attorney. He just got engaged. He's doing great. And, do I take credit for that? God forbid, I'm not going to do that. But was it worth trying to put a little bit of extra time to help make sure that he stayed in college and that we kept him on the right path? And the answer is absolutely. And would I do it again? No question. And those actions, if we as a community of men, and women can do it too, but men in particular, showcase this, it will grow, it will improve. And I think we can get there. But the dialogue has to shift. And when I say the dialogue, it doesn't mean we put down women. It doesn't mean we trivialize any of the dialogue or support that has been developed over the last 2 decades on our college campuses. They should be there. But it now just means let's make sure women are doing okay, but let's also make sure the men are doing okay as well.
Absolutely.
Sam, I love the way you kind of brought that all together. Is this the kind of silly analogy in my head? So I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. So like all the cereal commercials where this cereal is part of a healthy, balanced breakfast. I don't know why that's the analogy that comes to mind, but I think of what you just said as sort of this intervention for young men is part of a healthy, balanced societal renewal approach. We talk a lot on the show about the great work from Yuval Levin, about institutions, and I would venture to guess, I would argue that sort of the decline or the deterioration or the politicization of our institutions across the board are one of the major factors that's leading to a lot of these societal problems we're talking about. In this case, it's manifesting acutely, perhaps for men and boys in particular. But I love this framing of this is an essential ingredient to how we should be thinking societally to help all people flourish. But I love that the impact it could have for men and boys in particular, obviously. And in that context, if somebody's listening to all this and thinking like, oh, this all sounds great, but what am I supposed to do about it? Sam, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I wonder if you could offer any advice. First, I want to start with the men who may feel adrift. We put a survey in the field here at Sutherland Institute where we surveyed American men, so it was a nationwide sample, and one of the most stark findings to me was it was over 1/3 of those men said that they were struggling to sort of understand their purpose in their community, in their society. So I'm thinking of men who might feel a little bit adrift. What advice would you give for them specifically?
So I deal with this all the time because I see folks like this all the time. And the message that I have been sharing, and I believe is still the same thing, is you're not alone. You do have a purpose. You're valued. Let's help you find it. Let's go have dinner. And in many cases, a dinner and an interaction can make all the difference. And then an introduction can make all the difference. What we don't want to do is stigmatize this. We don't want to, try to create some form of psychiatric phrasing around it. People are adrift for a whole host of reasons. COVID accelerated that, certainly. Social media continues to accelerate all of that. But again, reminding people that they have purpose, they are loved, and they are valued can make all the difference. And it's where outreach comes in. But again, not necessarily even formal institutional outreach. It's worth a shot in some cases. But if I would say to the listeners, if you know of someone like this, you have a friend, a family member, a community member, please take a few minutes and actually go connect with them. It's not a social services issue. That stuff may often backfire. People may think it's too institutionalized. So it's critical that we as Americans say we have to make a commitment to the greater good and to our civil sphere. And that means helping people in need. I'm sorry if it's disruptive every now and then or exhausting, but we have to step up and help. And that's our sacred role and our sacred duty. It's part of conscientiousness. It's part of the informal norms that have enabled us to flourish for centuries. We do see them eroding, but that doesn't mean they have to erode. We can actually step up and do something about it. This is a core belief in Jewish theology and Jewish thought that, you never let anyone slide. But certainly if you see a Jewish community member struggling in any way, it is your obligation. It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment to go do something to help them. And I take that very seriously. And that's really the best advice I can give. Yes, we can build a bureaucracy. Yes, we can fund social workers or whatever. But in many cases, it's worked so well when it's authentic. Again, going back to that idea. And that's really the only advice I can. It's not, again, the most attractive advice, but it is the advice that I know works. And I've seen it work.
Well, Sam, we will leave it there. We'll have to have you on again on the show in the future because I think we covered a lot of ground here that Beth and I kind of unpack, and as we have more conversations about this critical issue as we go. So, Sam, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us and helping us make sense of these issues as we're having these conversations here on Defending Ideas.
Thanks for having me, and I really hope we can continue. This is so important.
Once again, that was Sam Abrams, professor at Sarah Lawrence College, an AEI scholar and visiting scholar here for us at Sutherland Institute. And thanks again always to Beth Akers, AEI senior fellow and contributor here, helping us make sense of all this. We're going to have one final break before we leave you with some final talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. What we discussed today, this need for formative institutions that provide community and mentorship, learning, and purpose as the kinds of things that can serve as anchors for young men. We need to think of these things not as luxuries or as secondary to public policy interventions, but as essential parts of how to help boys and men thrive. So my main takeaway for you today is this. Ask yourself two questions. First, what anchors you in your life? What experiences have you had through your family, faith community, educational opportunities, work experiences, volunteering, and mentoring relationships that have helped form you and provide a sense of purpose? Second, can you articulate how and why those experiences have been so formative for you and begin to share that whenever we talk about how to help boys and men lead flourishing lives? Be intentional about how you can help be one of those anchoring positive influences on young men in your life and make these principles more common in these kinds of public conversations. That could mean trying to be a mentor to someone or creating opportunities for brotherhood in other ways, or pointing young men towards faith, family, education, work, and service, and things like that as foundations for their future. It could also mean encouraging institutions from schools to civic groups and others to invest in efforts to help the moral and character formation of young men. Notice I did not say the solution is simply and solely to create more government programs or bureaucracy. Now, there is certainly an important role for public policy, as we've discussed before on the show, and we'll certainly do so again. But so often, real formative experiences happen because of genuine relationships built on trust, example, and shared purpose. And that's something that you and I can start doing today. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Make sure to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. Lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.